Hey everyone, my name is Jeff Mayer. I'm an audio engineer at Saddleback Church in Southern California, and you're watching DrumChats
Take
TV.
me back home, where I belong. Back to the place where all my fears and doubts are
Hey everybody, this is
gone.
Travis with DrumChats, and I have the pleasure to be interviewing my friend Jeff Mayer, who is an engineer at Saddleback Church in California. And I worked with him and got to know him at Shoreline Church here in Austin, Texas, where I play drums. And he's in California right now. Jeff, how are you, man?
I'm doing well, man. How are you?
Doing good. So you've been at Saddleback. You were at Saddleback, and then you came to Texas, and you went back to Saddleback. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's been kind of a roller coaster. I started off, up 10 plus years ago as a volunteer there. Um, that volunteering kind of turned into a contract type of thing. And then after my contract, my wife and I moved out to Texas, and that's where I met you. And then once we moved back, I got was on staff at Saddleback, so I've been there for coming up on 2 years.
Okay. And what all do you do for them?
So my title is systems engineer, but I'm more in the systems design. I still do engineering on the side for Saddleback, but my primary role there is working with all of our regional campuses in Southern California. So we have 16 regional campuses, from San Diego all the way up to LA. And the team I'm on, we kind of manage all the ABL systems. When we have a new campus that's going to launch, the team I'm on will build all the new racks. We put together, a front of house rack, a stage rack for inputs, video, and a lighting package, and we'll do trainings. We do install and integration work when we need to. So it's kind of a Swiss Army knife job, if you will.
Okay. So you said how many campuses do y'all have?
There's 16 right now in Southern California, and we actually have four international. So
Are y'all the biggest one in California, or are y'all one of the smaller ones? The one that
yeah,
you're
so
at.
the Lake Forest campus we call, that's kind of like the hub. The Lake Forest campus is the big campus. It's where Pastor Rick broadcasts from. That's where he preaches from most of the time. He will make his way out to some of the regionals. He likes coming out when we do a launch. He'll be there on launch day to kind of welcome the congregation to that new building and that kind of stuff. So
Okay. So let's take it back a little step. How did you get into engineering? Like, did you go to school for it, or did you go through like apprenticeships with somebody? Like, how did you get into the world of
yeah,
engineering?
so eventually I ended up going to school for it. But when I started, I was actually going to school out in Las Vegas for culinary arts management. So there's a
Nice.
huge career shift. Um, and I got really interested in kind of the EDM scene. So, I bought a laptop and put Fruity Loops software on my laptop and started making, EDM beats off, in my room. And then a bunch of my buddies were living in San Diego doing the same kind of thing. And when I left UNLV, I moved in with them. We had a home studio type of thing, and we started producing electronic music. Um, and as that kind of progressed, I got more and more into the mixing side of things and how things fit tonally inside a mix and the recording process and all that kind of stuff. So that's where I found the Art Institute down in San Diego, and from there I got a bachelor's degree in audio production. So
Okay, gotcha.
uh, yeah.
Okay. So you worked with Saddleback, you worked with Shoreline here in Austin.
hmm
Have there been other churches you've worked for? Did you work for other like event centers or venues? Like, what
Yeah,
else is
I
the history?
do. So I pick up freelance work when I can. I mean, a lot of us audio engineers, we're doing freelance stuff all the time. I've worked for C3 Church down in San Diego. Just did a conference for them about a month ago now. I've worked at church out in Nashville where we did Saddleback Celebrate Recovery Conference. We were out in Nashville a couple weeks ago for that. So it's kind of I pick up work where I can.
Yeah. Okay. And so you and I talked a little bit earlier too. You have a background in drums, is that right?
I do, yeah. So I started playing drums when I was 17 and 31 now. So
Been a little bit.
it's been a little bit, yeah. So
Okay. Cool, man. Well, let's get into it. So you and I've talked about it. One of the biggest things with drum chats is to get the perspective of not only drummers and connecting drummers with bigger drummers who they can aspire to be like or this and that, but also introduce what a lot of drummers I don't think understand about the industry is how your perspective from a live engineer can affect their playing, or perspective from a studio engineer or from a bass player. Like we've interviewed Matt Noveski and Travis Kennedy, and so now interviewing you as a live engineer, and me having worked with you and knowing how you run things from the front of house, I thought it'd be really valuable to get your input on what your job, or how your job affects the drummer and how the drummer affects you.
Mm-hmm.
So it can change drastically from house to house, but let's use Shoreline as an example. When you and I work together, generally, what is your end goal? I mean, your end goal is to make the drums sound good, but what but what is your if you could put it easily, what's your mode of operation to get the drums to sound good in the
Yeah.
house, in a general idea?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest thing from the engineer's perspective is we're trying to make whatever be 6, 8, 12 microphones on a drum kit, individual pieces of a drum kit, sound like one instrument, sound like one drum kit. The snare mic isn't just the snare mic that fits in with the overhead mics, and what's captured through the hi-hat mic and what bleeds through in the tom mics, that all kind of synergizes together. So my job is to make it sound good, yes, but also like one instrument. So from a player's perspective, the things I guess I'm looking for when a drummer comes up to the kit that's set up on stage, there's I guess two things that I expect from you. I expect you to be playing at the best of your ability that day, because a good player behind the drum kit helps my job like crazy. And two is tuning. I hope your drums sound good, because like I always say, I don't have a talent knob on the mixer. I don't have a make this suck less knob on the
Yeah.
mix. So those are the two things. Your playing as a drummer, and the tuning of your drum kit are the two big things that I'm looking for when a drummer comes. So
Okay. So what kind of drummer, whether it's playing or personality, do you look to work with? I guess like when you're dealing with a drummer, what advice would you give to drummers when they step into a live setting to help you help them?
man, I honestly think it's just that. Come into it knowing that, especially if I'm working with a drummer I've never worked with before, um, I guess be open to suggestions. Because as an engineer, I'm open to suggestions as well. Um, I guess scooting away from drums really quick. If I'm going in to either the studio or a stage where I'm miking an instrument that I've never mic'd before, I'm going to ask that instrumentalist, hey, how have previous engineers mic'd this instrument before? What sounds best? What miking technique sounds best on this instrument? Um, Sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought to the original question, but
So good.
um, sorry. Can you remind me how that question started?
Yeah, no, like if a drummer came to you and asked, "What do you need from me to make your
hmm
job easier?" What would you request from that drummer,
Yeah,
or what are you hoping to gain out of the drummer that you're working with?
yeah, yeah. I would say just be open both ways. I'm going to be open to suggestions from a drummer, and I would hope a drummer would be open to suggestions from me. And
Mm-hmm.
I guess specific microphone techniques, or even how he's playing. If he's maybe playing too hard, if he's really jamming on the cymbals really hard, and maybe we have a vocal mic that's pretty close to him, or a group of background vocalists that are right next to him. Maybe I'd ask him to maybe tailor his cymbal playing a little bit, um, so that there's not so much cymbal leakage into some background vocalist mics or something along those lines. So I guess just be open communication both ways. Um, know that I'm, as the engineer, here to help you, and I hope you're there to help me achieve a good sound. So,
Okay. So let's talk gear a little bit. Like in studio recording, a lot of engineers would want a drummer with a lot of options, where if this snare doesn't sound great, let's change it out for another one.
hmm
And live, you don't necessarily have the option to just swap out really quick, or the means to store a bunch of gear off stage or backstage. So if you say you have a drummer that comes in and he's got really brilliant cymbals and they're really bright, which can sound great recorded, but live they can tend to be kind of harsh.
hmm
What How would you go about working with a drummer who does have cymbals that are very bright and very loud? Just for example, how would you go about moving forward and saying, okay, he's got really brilliant cymbals.
hmm
How are we going to tailor the drums with the gear that he has?
Yeah. So I'm guessing this is probably in context where there's a ton of other open mics on stage, and those cymbals are kind of leaking into all those other mics, right?
Right, right.
So I guess two ways I would go about it. The first way would be if we have time, I would probably capture or record a part of rehearsal in a live setting, and then maybe during a break, come ask the drummer to maybe join me in front of house. We'll sit down, maybe talk for a minute, and listen to the playback. Um, I'd probably go about soloing up some microphones that are close to his kit, and just at least letting him hear what, hey, your cymbals are too bright or leaking into other mics because you're hitting them so hard. I'd let him hear what that sounds like, because a lot of times I've learned in the past, if I just come up to any instrumentalist on stage and start talking to them immediately about what they need to change, it's perceived in the wrong way.
Right.
It's perceived as, almost your tone is really bad. Listen to what I'm saying, you know, for whatever reason. So I'd at least I'd have him out to front of house, let him listen to what I'm hearing so that he can hopefully wrap his head around or understand, oh, that's what it sounds like when I'm jamming on the cymbals and the vocalist is right in front of me. There's definitely going to be a clash there with those two instruments. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So in that case, another big difference between live and studio is studio you have a lot more control, where you could record drums by themselves and then guitar and then bass and then vocals. But with live you have a lot of dynamics where you've got, a bass player and vocalist and guitarist, and you've got a giant room like the one here at Shoreline, and you may even in a church setting you may even have a choir. How how do you, like, even from an engineer's perspective, not even necessarily directly if talking or working with the drummer, but from your point of view, how do the drums affect the rest of your mix on a grand scale? I mean, like,
Yeah.
again, Shoreline, we'll use that as an example. It's a pretty big stage and everybody's relatively spread out. But why would you say that gear is important when it comes to live, where like recording you have a lot of control but live you don't? So why would you say, what would your reason be that gear is important when you're working with 10, 12, 20 people on stage?
Yeah. Well, the gear you're talking about, I think, is from a stage perspective is a microphone. So why microphones are important is really understanding the polar patterns of a microphone, because you can use where that microphone picks up sound the best, and also the null points of that microphone to isolate different things on the stage as best you can in a live setting. So the gear and the understanding of how the gear works is important, so that I can achieve as isolated of a drum mix or as isolated of a guitar mix or a vocalist mix as that I possibly can, so that when I do go to the console and have to make a change, whether it's with EQ or some sort of dynamics processing, I'm only working with that instrument and not the bleed of other instruments in that microphone as well. Um, so yeah, the gear is always important, but I think more importantly than the gear is understanding how to use the gear.
Okay.
So it's the same thing, you buy a new snare drum, and man, the snare drum cracks and it's loud and it's just fat sounding, but you're a jazz drummer.
Yeah.
It just doesn't fit. So understanding the gear and how to use the gear is super important.
Right. Okay. So with that, how would you navigate like working with a drummer on stage in that realm, like knowing your gear and what your setup is, but say your drummer comes in with the idea. I've heard a lot of drummers say that live, the your drums don't, the sound of your drums or the tuning of your drums don't matter live as much as they do recorded, because which is bogus, because recorded everything's very concentrated and it's everything is audible, like the smallest crack, the smallest overtone, everything is heard. But they have this idea where it's like, well, there's a lot of bleed, there's a lot of variables on stage. As long as I have drums and they produce sound, I'm good. Would you agree with that, or would you contest that? Because in my brain, I think you should still make your drums sound good before they hit the microphone. What would you say to that?
Yeah, so I would contest that. And the reason being, so when I was in school down at the Art Institute, a lot of the teachers and instructors down there taught us something called the good rule. And summed up, it's basically to produce a good sound, the first thing that needs to be good is, number one, the player. The player needs to be good enough to play his instrument. Secondly, the second, I guess, ring in the chain is you got to make sure your instrument sounds good, whether you're going to the recording studio or you're setting up your drums on a stage. The microphone is only picking up the sound that's coming off the drum kit.
Okay.
And if the sound coming off the drum kit sounds bad, then it's going to sound bad through the PA.
Yeah.
So it is as equally important to get your drums sounding the way you want them in the studio as it is on the stage.
Okay. So say you have a drummer who comes in, he doesn't really have the best, like you ask him, you say, I don't like this happened with our engineer Kyle and myself the other day, where he didn't like the floor tom. It sounded really dead. But say you're working with a drummer who doesn't know how to correct that, like, it's not producing a round enough sound that you want, but he doesn't know how to fix that problem.
Yeah.
How do you move forward from that? Like, how do you move forward in that situation? And if you could tell somebody what you needed from them beforehand, like what you're looking for in that kind of situation, what would you say? How would you go about that?
Yeah. Well, for one, I would hope up to that point I've developed a good enough rapport with the drummer to maybe have that conversation with him, because so much of what we do as drummers and as engineers is a relational thing, right? I can't come up to the guitarist on stage who I've never met before and joke about how his tone sounds bad, even if it sounds great, if that relationship isn't there. So, for one, trying to develop those relationships between an engineer and a drummer or any band member or something like that is huge. And then if it gets to the point where he doesn't necessarily know, or he or she doesn't necessarily know how to fix the tuning problem, I guess that's where me also playing drums in the past helps. So I could help you out in saying, well, hey, that floor tom sounds like a pillow right now. Let's maybe bump up the tuning on the batter head, and let's detune the bottom head so we get a little bit of a downward pitch, and we get a nice resonant tom sound. So I can kind of help guide them that way.
Okay. So in that case, I was thinking too with the idea that recording in a studio is different from recording live, and it can change. Live can be really frustrating because there's so many variables that happen that can really kind of blow somebody's mind when they're used to being in a recording studio or vice versa. But a lot of drummers I've seen where, like, some of my favorite drummers will use one kit when they're live, or one, like, certain sizes when they're playing live. But when they're recording, they're using something totally different than what they would do live. Like, live they may play with a 26 by 18 kick, but in the studio they're going to go with like a 22 by 14 or something, because the idea is that it's punchier, they have more control in the studio. I agree with that idea, but I also try to prove that idea wrong. But for you as the engineer, do you have kind of a default that you go to, as far as like, especially being a drummer yourself, and having that knowledge of cymbals and sizes and what they all do? Um, do you have a preference of what kind of kit you would work with live? Like if somebody came in, like, would you say I'd rather you have a smaller kick drum than a big kick drum, or I'd rather have you have a fat snare drum than a high poppy cracky snare drum? Do you have a preference?
Um, I guess personally, okay. So walking into a gig, let's say at a church, at a house of worship type of situation, I will pretty much default to whatever's on the stage as long as we can get it to sound good.
Okay.
Um, so uh, the opposition to that is maybe if I'm working with a band, maybe I'm going to go out on tour with a band that's got a specific sound that has, you know, whatever 70s rock influences, and he's got a small bebop kit. Obviously I'm going to recommend, hey, let's maybe get some larger tom sizes, a larger bass drum size to kind of fit that 70s rock sound, right?
Mm-hmm.
That John Bonham rock sound that we're all going for.
Right.
So yes, houses of worship kind of thing. I like I said, I default to the kit that's there. If we can get it sounding good, that's great. Especially with Christian music that we're playing in the church nowadays. I mean, man, it ranges from a rock song to a ballad to a super slow type song, or you get a song like Oceans that has all of those things in between. Um,
Right.
so it's hard to tailor a drum sound um, song to song like that in a live setting. So
Okay. Yeah. And it's not always readily available to backline a kit either. Would like, like, I mean, at least for a church setting. So you having a lot of background in the worship environment and working in the church's environment, but you also do freelance. Do you do like, have you ever been like a house engineer for a band, or have you worked in live venues where you may not necessarily be in a worship setting where you're working with, you know, at one set you're working with an EDM DJ, or in another set you're doing a pop rock band?
hmm
What's your experience been with those, and how do they differ for you as an engineer? Okay. Let's say you work with a '70s cover band,
hmm
and a '70s cover drummer, like a Bonham wannabe, and then you work with an R&B drummer. How different have, like, just an example? How different have those experiences for you been, as far as from one venue to the next?
yeah, man, when you go from two drastic ends of the spectrum like that, like you said, a '70s rock, maybe a '70s rock cover band one night, and then a funk band the other night. Um, it's obviously on me as the engineer to shift my sonic perspective, if you will, to know that the drums for the funk band aren't going to sound like the drums from the '70s rock band. Um, but it's just about almost pulling from your catalog of knowledge, songs I've listened to in the past, sessions I've been in on, um, live shows that I've done, is just drawing from all that information, what I've learned in the past, and tailoring as much as I can, as much knowledge as I can, to fit whatever genre of music we're playing, whatever style of venue we're at, whether it's a wedding, or a corporate conference that has a corporate band playing, to a worship setting, to a secular concert. It's just tailoring the sound, I guess, that you're going to produce out of the speaker, what the band is producing from the stage. It's about drawing all your knowledge and making it work for that situation.
Okay. So in that case, if you're engineering for, say you're engineering for a venue where there's openers, like there's an opening band, there's a second opening band, and there's a live, and then there's the headliner. There's multiple bands at one time, and people are swapping out different kits.
Mm-hmm.
What advice would you give to drummers who are going to be in those kind of environments, to help the engineer, where they may have only 15-minute changeover,
Yeah.
and they don't have an hour and 2 hours to set up everything and EQ and compress whatever they want? What
Yeah.
advice would you give to drummers to say, this is what you should prepare for when you have your 15 minutes of setup time to make
Hmm.
your relationship with your engineer that much better.
Yeah. Well, when you're working with a 15-minute changeover like that, the biggest thing from the drummer is just be prepared, be ready to go. When you're listening to the band before you's last song, you better have your bass drum in your hand, ready to jump up on stage and put it on the carpet, or at least jump up on stage and help that drummer get off so that you can get your stuff on stage. Like we talked about before, make sure your drums are tuned. You don't want to get up there on stage and you got 5 minutes to run through your 6 or 8 song set, and you're over there hitting your toms trying to get the sound right. So just be prepared. The live the live sound environment is a very fast-paced environment. And those of you watching who have experience in that know that you got to be up and playing within 10 or 15 minutes. And if you're not prepared and ready to go, it can be a huge disaster, not only for the drummer or the artist on the stage, but the engineer as well. So,
Okay. Um, Walk me through the setup if you can remember. It's been a little bit, but walk me through the setup that, or no, let's do what you're working with right now. Walk me through the setup as far as miking goes with your drummer at Saddleback in y'all's main room.
hmm
So that any drummers watching or any engineers watching can get ideas of options that they can use for mics that would be appropriate for live. Where
hmm
some mics would be, they have the idea that some mics would be appropriate for studio. What mics are you using, and would you recommend for even a drummer who wants to have his own live mics?
yeah.
Walk us through what you're using or what you would recommend somebody use, for a snare, whether it's on top and bottom, on your toms, kick, overhead, the whole thing.
Yeah. So for someone I think that is starting out getting into, hey, I want to put some mics on my drum kit and at least capture what I'm practicing or playing or something like that. A basic microphone package for the drums, sure, makes a great package. I believe it comes with 3 SM57s and a Beta 52. So the Beta 52 would be used on your kick drum, a snare on a 57 on your snare, and then even 57 for each one of your toms if you're playing a 4-piece kit. Um, it's funny, an SM57, everyone knows what an SM57 is. It's a $100 microphone, but you can pretty much put it on anything. And from an engineer's perspective, you should be able to make an SM57 sound great. Even in the recording studio, I had a buddy one time who owns a studio down here in California who, just for fun, put SM57s on the entire drum kit. So kick in and out, snare top and bottom, all his tom microphones, and even overheads and hi-hat. It was an SM57 on everything, and we captured it. And you know what? It sounded like a drum kit, and it sounded really good. So I guess my biggest thing is, don't think you have to go out there and spend $2,500 or $3,000 or $5,000, because we all know we can spend that much on microphones to get a good drum sound. You buy a few 57s. There's even some microphones that cost less than a 57 that you could get a good drum sound with. So yeah, don't think you have to spend a ton of money. 57s work great. What I'm currently using, when I can, I've fallen in love with a Telefunken microphone called the M82 on bass drum. I own one, and I use one whenever I possibly can. But I've been using them now for, I guess, 3 or 4 years, and I've yet to find a bass drum that it doesn't sound good on. So that's kind of my default for bass drum right now. Snare top, I usually go with a 57. I've really been trying to branch out and get away from the SM57 on a snare. But I guess it's just the sound I'm used to, and I know how to get it sounding right. Bottom snare microphone, we're using a Beta 57. So with the Beta series mics, you get a little bit more top end. So my thought with that is I want to capture those snare strainers really nicely. So if I get a little bit more high end on that bottom mic, I get a little bit more crispness out of that bottom mic. Let's see, toms. Man, I usually default to the Sennheiser what are they, the 604s, the little ones that'll clip onto the hoop of the toms,
Okay. Yeah.
that have the little kind of 90-degree angle on them. Those sound awesome. Um, Again, in studio and live, I've used Sennheiser 421s. Man, I've used expensive U67s on toms. But for a live setting, and honestly, a lot of recording settings, those little 604s work really nicely. And then for cymbals, I'll either use a pair of Shure KSM 32s, or if I can get my hands on them, the AKG 414s
Okay.
for overheads, and that's usually the setup I'm using for a drum kit. So
Okay. Cool. Um, so I love Audix, and it's funny that you brought up the Shure drum pack,
hmm
and I think that's it's like a household drum pack, but one of my friends uses that, and he loves it, and I don't know if it's because he owns it or like that ownership pride or
yeah,
what. Um, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, and I like that you said that your buddy used 57s on everything, and that's cool. I mean, that's a really great example to prove the point that you don't have to spend a lot of gear to make something sound great.
hmm
Like my sister gave me an old Italian microphone that she picked up in Italy, where it's got a 1/4 inch out, like soldered to the microphone itself, and
nice.
it didn't cost her that much, and it doesn't sound like fantastic, but it sounds really cool. Like
hmm
it's probably older than my granddad, and so I mean, legitimately. Um, but what would your advice to people to how to find microphones? Like, you're giving examples of what you like and
hmm
what you, like you said, what you're, the sound that you're used to. Like, I love the sound of an Audix i5 on my snare,
hmm
because it cuts out a lot of the higher frequency overtones that I don't like. But that's just because I went and researched it and then end up using it at Shoreline anyway. As an engineer, what advice would you give to somebody, drummer or non-drummer, on how to figure out what microphone they should buy?
Yeah, I think you said it. It's research. There are tons of YouTube videos out there of shootouts. Of everything from microphones to outboard gear to different snare drums, all that kind of stuff. Um, I was actually just watching one the other day with one of the guys in my office, and funny enough, it was on a snare drum, and they were trying out a bunch of different mics that people usually wouldn't choose for a snare drum. Um, so I guess, yeah, I'm trying to say go out there and research. Sound on Sound magazine does spectacular reviews in their magazines. They have digital versions of the magazine. You can always read those reviews. The digital version usually has links to sound examples of a certain microphone on a certain source type of thing, um, or YouTube. I hate to say it, man, but YouTube has so much information. I won't say good or bad information, but it has a lot of information on it. But you can definitely sift out the good, and there's tons of shootouts on there. I guarantee you, if you typed in snare microphone shootout in the YouTube search bar, you'd have videos to last you for a year to watch. So
Okay.
um, yeah, do the research, find out what other people are using, and I think most importantly, try and listen to it, which is why I'm kind of emphasizing the watch the video or click on the link that is the shootout, because reading a magazine or reading an article is great, but actually being able to hear it, and not just from an engineer's perspective, as a drummer, understanding what that microphone is how it's gonna react on your snare drum is really important. So.
Yeah. Um, would you recommend like people going out and like renting those gear if they can to get an idea, or would you say that renting used mics may not be the best source to get an idea of what that sounds like? If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I think there are. Gosh, I don't know of a lot of places that'll rent microphones anymore. If you can find that place and rent some microphones that you want to try, I would say go for it. Because better than listening to, a highly compressed video on YouTube and hearing what a microphone sounds like, if you can get that into your own space on your snare drum or your tom or your bass drum, you can hear what it sounds like on your kit, in context,
Sure.
kind of thing. So, yeah, I think if you can do it, rent the microphones. I know of a couple websites that'll rent microphones, but no real store that you can walk into anymore and rent microphones like that. So it's possible.
Okay. That's good to know, because I know here in Austin we've got like Rock and Roll Rentals, which is kind of a household rental place around Austin. But, and I'm sure Nashville's got a loot of them for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it's good to know too that, unfortunately, it's good to know that those kind of places are becoming obsolete, so that drummers can have the idea of, all right, well, I've got the use of YouTube now, or like I may
Yeah.
not be able to put it on my snare, but here's something. This is way off the beaten path of where we're at, but I had it in mind. And you and I had talked about Ralph Nader, one of the
Yeah.
BIOS guys, came
Mm-hmm.
down and did a Christmas special with y'all.
Yeah.
And I just thought of him immediately because I saw his face the other day on Instagram, and I knew you had worked with him. But to get in, I never got to see the production that you guys did with them. But
Mm-hmm.
what was it? Marching Central, what was it surrounded around marching with them? Because
Yeah.
I know that's what he's known for.
Yeah, it was. So our drummer at Saddleback is a guy by the name of Eric Kern. He's a phenomenal drummer. Our old broadcast engineer gave him the nickname Big Ben because he's always on time. I know, kind of corny, but it was serious. This guy is no joke. So Eric, I guess, knew Ralph from his drum corps days with the Blue Devils.
Cool.
I'm pretty sure that's where they knew each other from. So he asked Ralph to come in. It was for Christmas, Christmas 2017, so last year.
Yeah.
So he came in and produced an opener, like an opening kind of segment with marching snares on our stage, which was awesome. I didn't have anything to do with the production of that.
Oh, okay.
It was fun to watch, though. Eric did a great job with Ralph putting that whole thing together. And that's kind of all people talked about after the Christmas services. Like, wow, that opener with the marching snares was so cool. So, yeah, they did a great job with it.
Okay. I didn't realize you hadn't done the production. I was going to ask you how different it was for you setting up for marching versus a trap kit, because
Yep.
marching is a lot. They're very, very tight, very, very quick, and
Yeah,
just real
and loud.
and loud. So had
Yeah,
had you done it, because I
yeah.
know there's a lot of drummers that listen to mine and Dave Douglas's podcast with Drum Chats, and maybe watch these videos, who have marching backgrounds. And one of our
Mhm.
drummers at Shoreline, who plays our aux kit, he has a lot of marching background as well. Even for those guys, to get an idea whether it's miking or, I mean, I think the preparation coming into a live setting is the same for everybody. But how would you go? How would you have gone about miking them in that scenario where you've got
Yeah.
marching?
Yeah, so if we get into the geeky talk, for a marching snare like that, like we just said, I know it's going to be very loud. It's going to cut through a room without a microphone on it. So when I do need to capture that, whether it's for our broadcast guy or we have an external recording going on, or maybe I just want to bump a little of that microphone through the PA just to kind of reinforce it. I know I'm going to go with a dynamic microphone. A dynamic microphone is going to handle high SPL levels, and it's going to be able to take a beating, a super loud beating from a snare drum like that. And in this case, at Saddleback, during our Christmas opener, I know they actually used one of the Sennheiser 604s, the mic I mentioned earlier on Tom's,
Yeah.
because it clipped really nicely onto the hoop like that and just stayed where it needed to be. And they actually wired that into a wireless body pack, so we actually had wireless snare drums on stage, which was great because they were moving around. They couldn't be pinned to the stage by a microphone on a stand kind of thing. So, yeah, I know I would have to put a microphone on it somehow. So like I said, it'd be a dynamic microphone. and maybe just kind of creep it into the PA a little bit, because we all know those snare drums are incredibly loud, and they have crack for days. So
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, again, I appreciate having you on, and hopefully, we talked about it earlier, but the goal in this for everybody watching is to expand your knowledge of drums past your kit and what, because when you're playing live, it's not just about what you're doing, but your job affects the bass player, it affects the live engineer, it affects everybody else around you. So talking with guys like Jeff, I believe can really be very valuable to us drummers to understand how what we do affects the engineer and how we can help each other, because your relationship with your engineer is going to make your job a heck of a lot easier, and he's the one who is in control of making you sound great. And so even past that, having your own home rig, with having your own studio and your own gear, I think is very valuable to know that kind of information coming from somebody who deals with that on a daily basis. So Jeff, it's always good seeing you, man, and really appreciate you taking the time to give your input, and hopefully we can have a lot of drummers expanding on their knowledge because of everything that you shared. So really appreciate your time, bud.
that'd be great. Thank you so much for having me on, Trav.
All right, take it easy, man.
Waiting on the sun again.